Was it when we started talking then, recording?
Yeah.
Fine. Hello, Julie.
Hello.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. We're going to follow on from last week where you interviewed me a bit about my work. But just starting off, we sort of caught up a bit already, but I've caught sight of this amazing painting behind you in the studio. So before I ask you anything, I just want to ask you about that, because that looks really different. The colour is much sort of fresher and brighter and less earthy than normal. So I'm interested to know what's going on with that.
It's not my normal palette at all. I think I was just saying, actually, it's the painting that I can never finish. I have literally been working on it for about 3 years, but with really long gaps, and it has very nearly finished, very nearly been shown, but there's always been a bit that hasn't been quite right. And then I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I was working on something else, and it's just always kind of there in the corner of my studio, and I was using that an unusual colour for me, that kind of turquoise, and just in a little bit in another painting, just to give it a little bit of contrast with a much kind of a darker, redder colour. And I was so frustrated with this one. I was so at the end of my tether, I just literally slapped on this turquoise to cover it. Didn't really know what I was doing, and then actually quite liked it. And so I've just been working on it with sort of fresh pinks. And
why don't you, can you bring it up just briefly to the to the it's beautiful. So it's very wet at the moment?
Yeah, it is wet.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I love it. Are you feeling it's getting there more than ever?
I'm going to try to live with it and just to stop fiddling with it and see when it's dry if I like it. But what I don't know if you ever experienced this. What I've been having recently is quite a frustrating time, in that I've got a painting really nearly finished, but there's some little bit that isn't quite working. You start to work on that, it changes the whole painting, and then from something being nearly finished, you've almost gone right back to
it's that happens to me a lot, and I just think that because basically it's probably quite balanced, and if you forgot about it, you might actually think it was finished, but there's obviously something underlying that it's not really saying what you want it to say.
And I think one of the challenges of kind of being a painter is, and it's something I really struggle with, is to not, I can never kind of accept something's almost quite right. If I'm not quite happy with it, if it's almost working, I can't leave it. I have to kind of love it. I have to almost like be in love with that painting, or feel really happy with it. It can't just be kind of okay, good enough, but not quite right. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
But it can be really frustrating when, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think some paintings almost kind of seem to paint themselves. I can't really explain it, but they just feel quite easy. And others are just really, really hard work, aren't they? They just get you on and on. You can never quite kind of get them to that place of being finished.
I know, and there's like a strange conversation about, you think, why can't I just leave it very fresh with the fresh new energy, and then the other side thinks, I haven't worked hard enough on this, I don't deserve it, it can't really be right.
I know.
And that can't really be of any value.
And actually, I remember having those conversations with one of my favourite tutors when I was doing my my art college, art school. And she was sort of saying to me, it can be finished if it's really fresh and really new and you haven't done a lot of work on it. That's okay. And I could never quite accept that. It almost felt like I was cheating in some kind of weird way. And I've kind of got over that, as in now I know that's rubbish, but it still feels quite strange, doesn't it? It's like, it's almost like there has to be some sort of struggle involved.
Yes, it's a very classic thing. But also, by the same token, when I hear about other artists who work in these very predictable layers, and they say, oh, there's the underspace painting, and then there's the glazing, and I just think, oh my God.
It's so formulaic.
Exactly, I just could never say that. All the painting's real, there's no underpainting.
No.
I almost wish there could be. I mean, it often gets covered up, but I would never so formulaic, as you say. I'm just going to introduce you now. This is Julie Allan, and her Instagram account is Jules Allan, so JULESALLAN_art. And we'll find a way of tagging that when we release this at some point. And she's an artist and also a psychotherapist based in Sussex. And we have been friends for, I would say, about 15 years now, which is amazing. And I would just sort of say, you know, you are an amazing, loyal, supportive friend and art explorer with me, and a confidant, and we go on trips together, and we've been on this journey of coming back to painting together, haven't we? So what was my first question? So my first question was, you have a full-time job, and obviously it's pretty full on and quite tiring. So how do you manage to find the time, space and energy to produce sort of such a significant and powerful body of work, considering, you know?
I have to be really disciplined. So I work full-time for the NHS as an art psychotherapist, and I do love my work, and it's very much art-based, so I feel very fortunate to be spending all day doing art with other people. But as far as doing my own work is concerned, I have to be really disciplined. So I work full-time, but only 4 days, over 4 days. So I've got a day in the week, which is my studio day, and I'm pretty much in there first thing in the morning till kind of fairly late at night. And I tend to spend a day at the weekend if I can. Obviously life often gets in the way, but I really try and protect some time at the weekend, and I do find that's enough, actually. And I would always love to have more time, but it's okay. I can get enough work done with the time that I've got. Obviously when I have some leave or whatever, then I'll spend more time painting. I remember when I was younger and at art college, I could spend literally every day, all day in the studio. Just unbelievable energy I had for it. I don't feel that I can do that now. It's really interesting. I think that's really changed. I don't have the same sort of, I don't know if it's a physical energy or a psychological energy for it, but I don't need to be in the studio all day working. And I wouldn't choose to be if I had the time either. I'm not sure that would work for me. I think that would get a bit stale. And I love, you know, my art psychotherapy work really does feed into my painting. So I feel it kind of really enriches it. And I think as an artist, as a painter, I think your life is really important. And I think, especially as women, you know, we have to, our whole lives come into our work. We can't compartmentalize, can we?
I mean, you haven't ever particularly talked about that specifically when you say that your work feeds into your painting. What's the main way that happens? Is it are you aware of it, or do you just see when you look later? Or
I think it's just really, really unconscious. I mean, as an art therapist, I work with people who are really unable to find words for their feelings, unable to access talking therapy. So I'm helping them use art as a way of expressing thoughts and feelings, which is why I started painting myself. Actually, it was a way of expressing my kind of states of mind and internal states and feelings and emotions through my work. So that's very much what I do every day, is helping other people use art as a language. Which very much ties into how I use art myself. I mean, it's my own way of making sense of thoughts and feelings, and coping when life feels difficult, processing emotions. It's, you know, psychologically, it's quite a powerful process for me, painting.
And where did you go to uni, and what did you actually study? Was it fine art?
Yeah, so I studied, so I did a foundation course at Ravensbourne, which was an amazing foundation course, actually, a really fantastic foundation course, very inspiring. And then I went to Brighton. and did my fine art degree painting in Brighton. And then I really wanted to do an MA following my degree. I really wanted to do an MA in art, in painting.
Yeah.
But I just chose a more practical route and trained in art. So I did an MA in art psychotherapy, which was a way of actually supporting myself. Because I went through that stage, which I think a lot of people do after a fine art degree, of really struggling. And my course wasn't very good at supporting us. Yeah, terrible.
Difficult.
And I was just doing, you know, kind of really low paid care work, and just was really struggling. I couldn't see a way of how I was going to manage as an artist. So a lot of my friends at that point were teaching, were going into teaching, and I thought about that and then decided to pursue art therapy, which is something I'd always actually been interested in doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was something I was passionate about doing in its own self, and then really focused on that. Then I had my daughter and wasn't really able to paint for a long time, but always found my art therapy work really sustaining, and it was always a connection with art as well. So even when I wasn't doing my own artwork, I was still art was still my life. I mean, art has been my life in different guises.
But you've never had a really proper break from painting.
No. Well,
and you had a studio in Phoenix, didn't you?
I had a studio in Phoenix for years. Before Phoenix, I was involved in setting up an artist collective in Maze. So that was Maze Studios in North Road. So when I finished art college, I worked with a group of artists to set up this artist collective, Maze, in a very derelict old building that was a real labour of love to kind of turn it into a studio space. And we had lots of we had a gallery there, we had lots of exhibitions together. It was really an amazing time. But eventually we lost the building, which was really, really tragic. And because we just...
Was it all subsidised, like really cheap rent?
Yeah, it was, but it was, I mean, the building was awful. We had pigeons and rats, and it was cold and damp, and but really cheap, really, really cheap rent. But eventually, I can't remember the story, but the landlord took it back, or we lost it. So then I joined Phoenix, and that was still very early on in Phoenix, actually. That was pretty near the start of Phoenix Studios.
So that wasn't a guest at the time or anything?
No, oh God, no. It was, and again, the building was in a really sorry state. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as it is now. There was no waiting list, but you had to be quite involved, because again, it was such early days. You had to be quite involved in sort of working for the organisation, and it was a real community. Actually, it was a really exciting time. There was a real sense of community at Phoenix then. And I was involved in the gallery committee to choose the artists for the next shows and invigilate and having managing the gallery. So really exciting. And then when I had my daughter, I just wasn't getting in enough. I kept subletting it, really reluctant to give my space up. And eventually it just got to a point when I just kind of like had to kind of let it go, which felt like a real loss. But I just wasn't getting in there, and it was actually quite a relief to let it go in a way.
Was that when you were living in your flat in Park Crescent?
So I remember taking Georgia, my daughter, in there when she was a baby in a pram, and trying not to use oil paints and too much toxic materials. But yeah, I used to take her in there and until she was toddling around, and then it just became impossible. And then I just had, so that was the last time I had a studio, but I kept very connected with them, even though I didn't have a space. I used to go to a lot of their meetings. I was still a member, and really needed that kind of sense of community I got through being part of Phoenix.
Yeah.
And I have thought about going back. Now I've got the time, or more time. I mean, it's totally different now. It's a much more sophisticated organisation. There's a long waiting list. There's, I think, some sort of process of showing your work, which there wasn't then. But I'm actually, there's something I really like about having my studio space at home. It's not a huge space, especially if it was bigger. But I like the fact that it's at home, that I can sometimes I just come and sit in here late at night and look at a painting. So so I'm quite happy having this space at home at the moment. But I do miss the community. Of
course.
I think that's what you do really get from being part of an open studio, and the opportunities to show your work as well. So those kind of opportunities I miss.
And I was going to ask you a little bit about things that inspire you. Sort of first of all, I have on my list music. Do you listen to music when you?
I do sometimes. I do listen to music a lot. Sometimes it depends what stage of a painting I'm at, though. Sometimes I really need to be able to sit and just sort of connect with the painting in silence.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just play really loud music, and it can be anything from classical to anything. You know, I've got lots of different playlists, and it really is about my mood at the time. So yeah, music's really, really important. I love listening to music. I often start, I come into my studio, I normally start by reading poetry.
Oh, really? That was one of my questions. I was going to say, you know, I know you're a prolific reader.
Yeah.
I discovered that when we were away in, with some very literary people in Cornwall a couple of years ago. And I just going to put my glasses on a sec. So I've just put, is there a particular poet or writer that inspires you? And is there a connection between the fiction that you read and your work, or the subject matter of what you're reading? Does it come to your?
It's very unconscious. So in my studio space, I've got all my poetry books, and I've got lots and lots of poetry books. I've got loads of them. So I've got all my art books and all my poetry books together, and I just I've got some favourite poets and some favourite poems. And there's too many to really mention, and they've been like old friends all my life. I've always read a lot.
You come back to them.
Yeah, so it really depends on my mood. I was reading earlier today, I was reading some really beautiful Thomas Hardy poems that I just felt drawn to. There's one really beautiful, my favourite poem that I've named some paintings after that poem, actually. I was reading that. So I just often, it's called Neutral Tones.
Wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Who's that by?
Thomas Hardy.
Really? That sounds like a really contemporary title.
Yeah, I know, and it was written in 18 whatever. So yeah, so I often start by reading a poem, and then just kind of like getting into that sort of frame of mind. It's like letting everything go, and And
if you do you find it? Sorry. Do you ever find it difficult if you get into interrupted to get back into your content, or are you quite good at that once you're in the flow?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I do find I get really distracted on Instagram. I've got to be really careful. Rabbit holes of just looking at Instagram.
Unbelievably time.
Oh my goodness. I mean, social media it's not so much other people interrupting me, because I don't really get interrupted when I'm working. It's me, I'm interrupting myself through looking at social media. And I think sometimes that's okay, because it's all art based, isn't it? So it can be really helpful, but then you've just got to be really disciplined that you don't end up kind of losing too much time. But I think, it is a fantastic resource for art. I mean, I remember, like you would, Kate, as well, when we were at college, having to go and get artist monographs from the library, and I had them all over my studio floor. But now you've got them all on your phone, haven't you? And I've got an iPad. It's a really old iPad in my studio that is covered in paint. It's absolutely awful. And all I've got on it is Instagram. And so I just sort of see pictures on it.
Is that the way you stop maybe having your phone in your studio? That's a really good idea, actually.
I haven't got anything else on it. It's an Instagram. I've got everything else disabled. An iPad, I've got everything else disabled apart from Instagram. I haven't got email or anything else on it. And that does help, actually, to cut down the distractions from my phone.
I've got books full of postcards, because I used to just pick up postcards if I went to an amazing exhibition. I still have them around a bit, but it was kind of a similar thing, because it was like a way of connecting to something that inspired you, but more obviously not so ever changing as Instagram does. And I also wanted to ask, do you ever get sort of blocked with your subject matter or your practice when you struggle to move through?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and it's really painful and horrible. I think I've got some techniques of kind of managing that, which is to work on a few paintings at the same time.
Right.
So rather than just one, to have four, and sort of working kind of series. So,
yeah.
But then if at times when I'm really blocked, and this did happen to me maybe about a year ago, I was really struggling. I went back to drawing.
Yeah.
So I just went back to drawing using inks and just kind of doodling, just taking the pressure off, trying to free myself up, saying it doesn't matter, trying to play, trying to enjoy it. And that normally kind of gets me kind of back again.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, drawing I would say is the way over the block.
And I mean, we've talked a bit before about going back to painting seriously after having a break.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, from what we've just said, I don't think you've maybe had such a solid break as I did. You know, you had your studio, but I know you felt you weren't.
Oh yeah. I mean, I wasn't painting serious. I felt, I mean, even though I always kept sketchbooks, I had my studio, but I didn't have my studio for 15 years, probably 10 years maybe.
What, so when you left after all the subletting, it was about 10 years?
It was probably, it's probably 10, 12 years of not having a studio space and not having anywhere to work. Still doing art every day at work though, with my art psychotherapy job, but not doing my own work, and certainly not working in any serious kind of way, just keeping sketchbooks, keeping my interest in the art world. But it did feel like a kind of a grief, actually. It did feel like a real sadness. I remember going to shows and private views and actually feeling a real sense of kind of loss and sadness that other people were painting and I wasn't. And then just kind of trying to accept that. And then I think you and I kind of, there was such a lovely synergy between us, wasn't there? I remember going to some art fairs with you, and we were just, it felt like it was so lovely having your friendship. You know, we were like buddies, kind of inching our way back out there again, weren't we? From going to exhibitions, going to art fairs, starting that, because it's a process, isn't it? You just don't suddenly launch right back into being a serious painter. You have to, you know, you're kind of slowly getting back there again. And of course the art world had changed so much in the time since, you know, the last time that I'd been painting seriously because of social media. I mean, you know, the last time I was working seriously, you used to send your slides off to a gallery in an envelope and wait for that, and with a letter. It seems unbelievable now.
And did you set your website up when you got back into painting the last, what, 4 or 5 years?
I got somebody to do it for me. Technology isn't my thing, so I got a lovely recommendation for a web designer from a friend who's been fantastic. So yeah, that's been the biggest learning, I would say, is the whole kind of internet and how that's changed the art world.
Yeah.
That's been huge.
Find my next question. So I was going to ask, have you got any particular sort of role models, or, you know, in terms of artists?
Any
role models? Obviously, we could talk about your favourite painters at some point. In terms of
wondering, because that's different, isn't it? I'm just thinking. That's a really interesting question, because I could kind of go on all night about my favourite artists. I mean, I think there's definitely something very inspiring about older women working, coming back into the art world again. I mean, somebody like Phillida Barlow, who is amazing, and I think she taught for years, didn't she? But she brought up children and didn't really make much art for years, and then represented Britain at the Biennale years ago. So incredible. So and also, of course, Louise Bourgeois, who just carried on. I mean, she's an artist I like, but more than that, she's a she's such a role model as a woman, because she carried working right into her 90s, didn't she? And people like Rose Hilton, and oh, and I was reading in the paper this morning this absolutely heartbreaking story that really just seems so sad, but really interesting, about Barbara Hepworth. So she had had triplets. She was living in Hampstead with Ben Nicholson, and I think he was still seeing Winifred Nicholson. There was a bit of a love triangle going on. It was confusing. But she had triplets, and she was living. She wasn't living with him. I think he was still with Winifred Nicholson, and it was just about her struggle to carry on making her art with triplets, newborn triplets.
Did she manage to?
Well, she did something that she was really criticised for, but she gave them. She didn't give them away. They went into some sort of daycare kind of facility.
That's tiny.
Yeah. So she could paint, and I think she was really I don't think that was a thing at the time.
It wasn't.
It really wasn't a thing at the time, and I think she was really criticised for it. Of course, Ben Nicholson wasn't criticised for the fact that he wasn't there looking after them. And the interview with her, that obviously, years ago now, but she was saying that if she didn't do at least an hour or two of her work every day, she would just go mad. But she had really agonised about sending them into this facility, and had felt incredibly guilty about it, but knew that for her own sanity, she just had to have at least an hour or two a day to do her own work. So I think, role models are women, particularly women that have had to juggle childcare and families and life and still make art.
I saw a really good documentary about Paula Rego, actually, or a film. I think she had 3 or 4 children, and she was quite distant from them, it appears. And painting was always her first thing, and they knew, they kind of understood, and she was just, if you were being you know what I mean, against women, misogynist, you would, how selfish, because but she would just openly say, my painting is my primary concern, it is my heart, it's my passion, and children have to fit around that, and that's all the way it always will be, and they did accept it, actually.
I've read an interview with her son, or heard an interview with her son. I wonder if that was the same one that you had. And he basically said, well, we always knew that her life was her art, and we knew kind of where our place was. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because her husband, Victor Villing, who was a really very well-known artist at the time, nobody would ever have kind of said that about him. Nobody would ever say that about a male artist, would they? It just wouldn't be discussed.
She's such an ambitious artist as well. I mean, incredible.
Huge pieces. Something about her, that apparently she was partly responsible for changing the abortion laws in
Portugal.
Incredibly restrictive.
Very political.
Yeah.
No, I find that really interesting, seeing how women who've managed to maintain their practice or go back to it when they've had children, because it is very hard.
It is really hard, isn't it? I don't think I kind of realised. I think I presumed I would just carry on. I would always carry on, but actually, letting it go was important in a way as well, but also trusting that it would come back. And now I just feel this huge excitement about it, but also a kind of a pressure. It sounds a bit dramatic, but not having so much time. Do you know what I mean by that? A sense of a pressure of, it's like, not that I wasted all those years, because it wasn't a waste, because I was doing the most amazing and rewarding things, but there was a sense of that, well, that time's gone now. And I need to kind of catch up. So there is some pressure to get my work out there, I think.
And how are you finding, like, the whole situation with the lockdown at the moment, and is it affecting your art practice or not particularly?
I think I'm really lucky. I mean, so many artists have lost their studios, haven't they? Which must be absolutely heartbreaking. I know Phoenix is closed. Having a space at home is just, I feel so lucky to have my space at home. And I've carried on working. So I don't feel as affected by it as a lot of other artists have been.
And I'm going to just go back to, we started off with talking about the painting that's behind you. So do you, and you asked me last week, and it was quite interesting, that how I actually started a painting. So ask you the same thing. How do you approach the beginning of a
Yeah.
painting?
It's interesting, isn't it? I've just come to the end pretty much of a series of about 5 or 6 paintings. Often work in a series about five or six together, and they all kind of inform each other. So it's like when I've started one of them, the other ones don't feel so hard to start, if you see what I mean, sort of working on them in that way. But I've just come to the end of that, and I've got 3 or 4 blank canvases, and I do feel, right, I really don't kind of know where to start with these ones. So I'll probably have a time of just doing a little bit of drawing, a little bit of thinking. Often with me, it's about materials, so I use a lot of different materials and texture in my work. So I might get excited about a new technique or texture that I'm working with.
And what materials, what's your medium at the moment?
Well, I do oil, I use oil on canvas, but I also use, I've got some fabric from the new paintings, which I'm really excited about, like scrim and
that you're going to add in them.
Don't know really what I'm going to do with them yet. So often I just kind of will be drawn to something and I just don't really know what I'm going to do. So I've got netting. I've also got lots of kind of wire net, like chicken wire. Just kind of really drawn to using that, and I really don't know how that's going to look.
You use gesso, don't you?
Yeah, I use a lot of gesso. I make it myself, which is quite a process. So often in a new series, it's very much about spending time playing with materials. So I mix up lots of gesso, paint the surfaces, and then mixing things like concrete and tile materials.
Because you use relief quite a lot, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think it's playing with materials, and then the content kind of comes from the materials. So there's a kind of a synergy between them. So with the new series that I'm starting, I'm a bit stuck because I need to get some more canvases, and I'm not sure I can under the lockdown. I'm pretty much out of them. But the inspiration is going to come from these materials that I've bought, and there will be a lot of just playing, I think, and trying to, and that's actually the process. The bit I enjoy the most about painting is that original playfulness. The most difficult time, I think, is when you're kind of halfway through, when you're finishing them, you can kind of see the end in a painting. It's almost there, it's almost resolved, and you're just kind of finishing it. That's quite nice. There's often a really painful in between bit, which is a bit of a struggle, but the start I enjoy.
Yeah,
the start of a new series.
Your colour, you have often worked in quite a kind of monochrome or quite a limited palette.
Yeah,
very earthy. And what do you think? Where does that come from?
Well, my work's always been very much based on the human body. And the female body, in my experience as a woman in a body in the world. So I've tended to use colours which are, so lots of kind of flesh colours, lots of kind of earthy colours. I haven't kind of wanted to get too distracted by bringing a lot of other colours, so I've kept my palette fairly neutral and fairly kind of monochrome. I mean, I love colour, but it can be very kind of seductive, and like that kind of all that green in that painting.
Acting.
It's very bodily, and now goodness knows what it's kind of saying. I mean, landscape isn't an influence to me, for example, or nature isn't an influence, and I think I've avoided a lot of colours related to nature because I haven't wanted that influence to come into my work. So I've kept it very much about the human body.
I didn't realise that.
Limited palette. I just kind of find it easier as well in a way to have a limited palette. I can get very distracted by colour. But actually, I am that turquoisey colour I've been using quite a lot of in my recent paintings. Just against a kind of a really rich kind of browny red that I've been using. It just, if you put a bit of that turquoise next to it, it just makes the red kind of really zing. It really kind of almost catches it on fire in a way. So so I tend to use other colours almost as an accent rather than to be kind of important in themselves, like, you know, blues and greens or whatever.
They're often quite deep, aren't they? But I mean, I know you've got some very chalky light colours as well. Fast, so sort of Saitomi inspired, or I mean, But they also remind me a bit sometimes of some of the Renaissance, or chiaroscuro,
Oh
or is that how
yes.
we were talking about Fran, and
that's a really good point, Kate. And somebody like Goya, who does
yes,
use that light and that dark.
Yes. Yeah, they feel like that. They do feel like they're in the dark quite a lot of the time.
And I think if you use that chiaroscuro of light and dark, it does kind of give a dramatic effect, actually. So it gives it a kind of a drama, just using very dark and very light kind of together.
Yeah, they're amazing. And so what would you say? It's, you asked me last week, well, who am what was my favourite painting? What is yours?
Oh my goodness! Well, do you know that the funny thing about that is that it's actually the same as yours, and I think we've talked about that before. It's Door to the River by de Kooning, and I just remember the first time I saw that painting, I was probably about 16, 17, maybe a little bit older, but not.
So was it in this country, or did you see it in a book?
Well, I saw it in a book. I had a book, a library book, and it was American abstract expressionists, and it was just discovering them when I was like, that age, was just like a whole world opening up. I was completely just blown away by, on a real visceral, on a really visceral kind of level. And I just remember finding that picture in the book, Door to the River by de Kooning, and just spending hours looking at it. I just couldn't get enough of it. And I still can't. It's never kind of like worn off.
Even if we sit together one day.
I know. I don't think I've ever, I had a heartbreaking time in New York a couple of years ago. Well, New York was fantastic, but I went to the Whitney Museum, where I think it's got a permanent home there, and it wasn't there. It had been lent out somewhere, and I remember that was one of the highlights of my trip. I was so looking forward, and it had been quite a difficult trip for lots of different reasons anyway, but the one thing I was really looking forward to doing was seeing it, and I went there and it just wasn't there, and it was just it was so disappointing. So no, I've never actually seen it, but maybe we should go to New York together and see it, pay homage.
But it's such an important painting. Any retrospective of his, it will probably be in, won't it? I would imagine. So,
and I've got a feeling I may have seen it. I remember there was a big abstract expressionist show in London. Well, we saw one together, didn't we, a few years ago? I don't think it was in that.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
But I think there was another one. I remember seeing one in my 20s. May have been. Yeah, I mean, all of de Kooning is just incredible, mind-blowing.
And any other, apart from him, who the artists that inspire you?
I think it's changed over the years. I absolutely loved Edvard Munch when I was, and sort of German expressionism. I love
Eva Hess. Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting. Carry
on. Joseph Beuys, big influence. Kiefer, so lots of German art. Eva Hess.
Yes.
I was very, very influenced by her. Still am. I bought her diaries recently, which I've been reading, which is incredible, really interesting.
Incredibly ahead of.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it was absolutely tragic reading her diaries, actually. They're just recently published by Hauser and Wirth. I think they've got her work, and she was just so young when she died. She was just 34, and it's just heartbreaking to think about what she could have been producing if she had lived.
I think she died the same year we were born, possibly. Maybe.
Yeah, I think
I seem to remember.
Yeah, or maybe 60s. I think it was. Yeah, it was around about that time, wasn't it? And she she had a brain tumor, possibly related to some of the materials she was using, because she was using some really noxious.
Oh, really?
Substances. There is a theory
in my mind with Sylvia Plath and maybe the cellist Jacqueline Dupre, of these sort of, tragic
characters. all died around about the same time. But actually, I've read her biography by Lucy Lippard, who was a friend of hers, who got very angry about those kind of like associations with Sylvia Plath in particular.
Really?
Because she was just sort of saying it just kind of really romanticized her, and actually she didn't commit suicide. She wanted to live. She wasn't this tragic suicidal figure. She died of cancer, but she would have hated to have been up there with Sylvia Plath and really romanticized in that way.
Sorry, she fell into a cliche there, but yes, I think it's just because she was her age, and like the pictures, the black and white pictures, and it kind of fits into tragic heroine.
Had a tragic life. Her mother had committed suicide. Her family had come over from Germany, I think, after the sort of Holocaust. I think they'd been, she lost relatives in the Holocaust, and then her mother tragically died when she was really young. That kind of always really affected her, I think. So she had a lot of demons, but she was also just this kind of fantastic artist.
Was she? Did she make conceptual work as well as her painting?
Yeah, so she really was so ahead of her time. She made a lot of sculpture using materials that weren't often associated with sculpture, like lots of latex and kind of very soft kind of material.
And that's why I connect with Louis Bourgeois as well. I sort of connected to it a bit. And that reminds me to ask you, have you ever gone down the route or mentally considered the route of doing some form of conceptual work yourself?
I used to do a lot of sculpture. My work's not very conceptual, as in it's not so much about the idea, it's very much about its physical presence, I think, rather than an intellectual process.
Yes.
But I actually, one thing my degree wasn't, it had lots of strengths, but it wasn't very good at allowing us to kind of use other art mediums. The sculpture department was in a different building, and they didn't encourage. I remember going along there and wanting to sort of learn some of the techniques, but they really didn't encourage that. It was very much, well, you're painting, why would you want to come to the sculpture department? You're painting, which is really annoying. I still think that's really annoying. But I did do a lot. I did make a lot of sculpture around about that time. I haven't for a long time now.
What materials did you use?
I used a lot of the materials that I still use. I used a lot of plaster. So I used to make kind of objects, plaster, kind of latex, cloth. I don't think I've got any of them. I've got slides. I've got lots of slides of my sort of sculpture, but I was always mostly a painter rather than the sculpture was never kind of my big love. I was much more of a painter, but I was very much interested in kind of relief and using lots of different materials rather than just paint and canvas. So I did a lot of stitching, a lot of sewing and stitching in a lot of my work when I was doing my degree, and now that's still quite important. Like today I've been sewing some pieces of canvas together for a new piece. So sewing's really important.
Wow. And is this going to be a really big piece that you're sewing
it's
together?
120 by 100, which is as big as I've gone. I know we've talked about that, Kate, haven't we? I'd really like to work bigger, but it's just the practical issues.
It's literally getting it into your house.
Yeah. What you do with it afterwards, because it's harder, isn't it, to shift big, it just they're not part of a domestic market, I think, if they become really big, are they? Which is fine, I don't have a problem with that, but it's just something to be kind of thought about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it would be quite fun to one day to maybe go. It would be logistically quite hard, but just to find somewhere, maybe we could go together where we worked in somewhere bigger than normal. And
I know.
Cut a month or 2 months, and we took some materials with us and we just worked on large, even if it was just big drawings or a couple of big paintings.
It's something I've been thinking about. How great would it be to hire even a garage or something? And just get some really big canvases and just enjoy, and almost not in any sort of pressured way about just doing just enjoying the process of working really big. It would be amazing.
the answer could be not putting it on a stretcher, but having it flat on
Yeah,
the floor. But that's a very different thing, isn't it?
yeah.
So
It's quite difficult. I find that quite difficult, not working.
you need yours to be quite solid and quite strong, don't you?
Do you do
Yeah.
that? Do you sometimes just work on canvas on its own without a stretcher?
I haven't, but I've sometimes thought, is that the way? But I think the object and the way it's off lifted from the, I like the edge. I like that sharp edge. So when I work on paper, I go off the edge all the time. They're often very, not very defined. So I suppose it is possible I could do that. But yeah, it's that whole thing of what are you going to do with it and where's it going to go?
Yeah.
You almost need permission or it to be a commission
Yeah.
to
And they do
justify it.
pile up, don't they, paintings?
They do.
They do. Yeah, you end up with it. Well, I've got a lot of them, which is fine, but
I know I've got some in offices at the moment, which obviously are completely empty. They are viewed by the ghost office. But in a way, it's good because they're not here stuffing my studio up. But it's going to be very strange when they come back because I've forgotten about them a bit.
I guess that might not be for a while though, because kind of lockdown, the offices aren't being used, are they?
And I've been sort of playing with the idea of, I don't know if you know, the exhibition that you've had some work in, where the woman has, can you explain that a little bit, where it's been projected onto her house?
Oh yeah, so that was an amazing woman called Abigail Miller, and so she did an In My House exhibition, which wasn't, so she's a curator, she's an artist and curator, and what she wasn't doing was what a lot of artists are doing at the moment, showing work in the house. It was using her houses. So this wasn't a lockdown, specifically a lockdown project. This is what she kind of does. So she worked with some other artists that I'm involved in this anti-MA collective. And with my work, she projected one of my paintings onto a door in her house, and it was the most amazing kind of dramatic effect. It was really exciting, really exciting. It just made me realize how much potential there is with art. And to show it differently.
That actually would be quite a good way of getting people to work out whether your work would work in their house as well. If they, and I've always been a bit precious about people seeing my real paintings, and then I'm starting to think that you just can't be completely like that because you're just.
What do you mean, Kate?
Well, just thinking that if someone hasn't seen the actual physical art in front of them, how can they understand it or appreciate it or get it? That's just really limiting who will see.
I know. I do get that though. I think it is an issue, and I really don't think my work I mean, nobody's work looks as good, does it, on sort of Instagram or whatever as it does in flesh. I think because I use such a lot of materials as well, I'm always really disappointed with how my work looks on my website. I'm never happy with it. I mean, some work looks better than others, but generally I think an awful lot gets kind of lost in, and also the scale as well. They're so small and
I know.
Difficult, isn't it? You just want to be showing them in the real world, don't you? And people kind of, which of course we will be able to again when lockdown's over. But I do want to. I have got quite a lot of old. I know we've talked about this. I've got quite a lot of older paintings that I'd really like to get out somehow.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe we should think about
it a couple of times, but to someone else they knew, because no one's been aired for a couple of years. So it's there's stuff that other people might like that's older. To them it's all work.
I mean, we've talked, haven't we, before about having a show together, maybe hiring a space or whatever. So obviously that's all on hold at the moment, but it's something that might be worth thinking about for the future.
Do you know when you're next? You probably don't know because of lockdown. When you have some work in reality on show.
So I was due to. I mean, it would have been happening around about now, actually, which is really frustrating. In a studio gallery in London, in Lewisham. I was going to be part of a group show, and then another show potentially in Brighton slightly later in July as well, which I think is off. So yeah, so no, at the moment they've both those opportunities have been postponed. So yeah,
It's difficult.
I'm kind of, in a way, I'm sort of trying to see it as not necessarily a positive thing, but just kind of come from a place of acceptance. And we're all in the same boat, aren't we, across the world? So it doesn't feel, I'm not upset in a personal way, because everybody's
you have a gallery at the moment, obviously. Yeah. So you actually haven't been involved in the open houses because
since
the gallery.
The gallery, and of course the gallery's closed now. Kelly Miller Gallery's closed.
So for you, this part of the year, which for me was always a big focus, the open house for the last 5 or 6 years, whereas you enjoying it as a visitor more than anything.
I have really missed it this year, though. It's such a lovely thing about Brighton, and I always really enjoy your open houses because they're so great. So it's felt like a really funny May. And then we go to the Phoenix Open Studios together, don't we? And I really enjoy that as well. All that networking that we do there. And
I think that would have been a weekend, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
I think missing.
I think so, yeah. But it will all come back. Life will come back to normal, won't it? It
Absolutely.
Will. Is the artist open houses, that's going to happen later in the year? Or what are they saying?
They were aiming postponing it towards October, but of course nothing's certain. They haven't given us any. And I mean, I would be disappointed if it doesn't, but if it completely is another year, I will cope. We'll cope.
Yeah.
I think for me it's quite good because it's made me think about the structure, even though I've understood intellectually that it shouldn't just be so much of a focus. I really can tell by the absolute flat lack of a deadline at the moment that I need more than one big thing to work towards. And I did Lewis Art Wave last year as well, which was great. I don't know about that, if that's going to go normally in August. So yeah, I just need to make sure there's more regular things to work towards. Otherwise it feels a bit like I'm in a vacuum. I'm struggling to aim. And
absolutely, I totally get that as well, Kate. You just need a deadline, don't you? Something to work towards, some pressure.
Around doing nothing. I'm working, but it's a different thing, really.
Yeah, there's something that really gets me. If I've got a deadline, it really gets me going with my work. And it's exciting, isn't it? Knowing that you've got an opportunity to show your work. It's really exciting. I mean, that's the nice bit, isn't it? We spend all these months working away in the studio. And actually, when you see a painting in the real world and a member of the public enjoys it or even buys it, and you just get that feedback and you see your paintings out in the world on their own, it's just brilliant. It's the best thing of all, isn't it?
It's amazing. Yeah. And the other thing is that during the festival you just meet quite a few new people, other artists, and that's really lovely because you widen your circle of people and support each other as well. So that's
there is a lovely network, isn't there, in Brighton of artists and sort of women as well. Lots of women our kind of age, I think, as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
Lots of women that have maybe had children, that have had some time out. Yeah. Would you consider doing an art fair? I know that's something we've talked a little bit about.
Yeah, no, I would. I am quite interested in that. I know it's been really disappointing for some people that were going to do the other art fair, and it was a big, quite important financial thing for them, and that they put a lot of outlay for frames and various other things. I would consider in the future, definitely. Yeah, it's a bit scary, the whole thing. And of course, you can't guarantee you're going to get in just because you apply. I would like to do that.
Yeah, I think that's something we've talked about sort of doing together, maybe, haven't we? Maybe sharing the cost of transport and that kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And is there anything you feel we haven't covered that you want to talk about your practice.
I think that's been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Kate. I don't think, yeah, I don't think there's anything left out.
Sure.
Well, thank you. So,
We'll have to carry on thinking about things that we can focus on next time.
yeah. So I'm going to stop the recording.